Welcome to Aspect Ratio Part 2. In this tutorial, I'm going to deal exclusively with pixel aspect ratio because I don't think I went into enough detail about it at the end of the last tutorial, and I'm worried that I gave you enough information to scare you, but not enough to make you realize that actually this is pretty foolproof. So what I'm going to do is show you all the different places where you can correct the pixel aspect ratio and how little difference it makes where you end up doing that. So in the previous tutorial, I gave you the example of handbrake, and I said that when you're going from handbrake, it's going to want to give it to you in 720 by 480. It's going to want to output it in 720 by 480 4.3, which, as we said, is the correct resolution for 4.3 with rectangular pixels, but not correct for 4.3 with square pixels. And I said use keep aspect ratio, make sure you have those lovely 640 by 480 resolutions going on. I'm just going to de-interlace this because it looks terrible. And so I said export it that way so that you end up with a 640 by 480 MKV file if you're exporting from handbrake. I also mentioned that I don't usually use handbrake, that usually when I export from Mac the Ripper, which is true. Now if I go to Mac the Ripper and pick a title, you see it will say 4.3 here, but Mac the Ripper gives you a VOB or an M2V file, which means it doesn't convert it at all. So Mac the Ripper is not converting your rectangular pixels to square ones for the computer. Mac the Ripper is exporting it in 720 by 480. Is this the kiss of death for vids? No, not at all. Let me show you a couple of Farscape clips that I prepared earlier. So this is one that I made using handbrake. Here it is. Aspect ratio looks right, nobody is smooshed, there's no extra letterboxing. And if we go to show stream info, indeed, it is 640 by 480, the exact way that I exported it. So this has square pixels, right? Good, good. Now let's look at the one that I made using Mac the Ripper. And let's again go File, Show Stream Info. Will you look at that? It's 720 by 480, 4.3. Which means that this, in fact, has rectangular pixels. Still looks fine, no harm in it. Nothing is squooshed, nothing is letterboxed. Okay, but surely it's going to cause harm at some point, right? Surely I have to make a decision between these rectangular pixels and the square ones. Well, you should, because it'll save you time and it will save you vid prettiness. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world, because both MPEG Streamclip and Final Cut can account for it at various points. So if you're using something like Mac the Ripper that gives you the file direct from DVD, which means you end up with these rectangular pixels, you can choose to export from MPEG Streamclip and at this point change it from rectangular to square pixels. So this file, as we noted before, has rectangular pixels. It's 720 by 480. So I can either export unscaled, 720 by 480, leave it alone again, give me another rectangular pixel file, or I can choose at this point to scale it to square pixels, 640 by 480, 4.3. Both of these options will yield a picture that looks just fine. The only difference is whether I want to go from rectangular to square pixels at this stage, and indeed whether I want to do it at all. Let's make a couple of different options. Let's leave this 720 by 480 for now. Let's call it Farscape 720. Now let's go ahead and do an export from the MKV, which, as you recall, I already changed the pixel aspect ratio to square. I'm going to export to QuickTime. So once again, we have the ability to either do it unscaled or in this scaled 4:3 version. But actually notice it says no scaling will be performed because these two are the same. This has already been scaled 640 by 480. So let's make that movie and let's call it Farscape 640. Alright. So now we've made these little test files. Let's bring them into Final Cut and have a look at them and see what our options are. Alright. That's what 640 looks like. And that's what 720 looks like. 720 looks a bit like crap because I haven't deinterlaced it. I should have deinterlaced it actually in MPEG Stream Clip. Whereas I did deinterlace this Farscape in Handbrake. So that difference is only because one has been deinterlaced and the other hasn't. They're the same quality, they're the same size, and as you can see, nobody is squoosh at all. Because Final Cut is able to make the distinction between square and rectangular pixels and compensate for it. So now what happens when I go to make my vid? What kind of settings am I going to vid in, and what settings am I going to export in? It all depends on what I decide to set my sequence to. If I put the 720 down first, it'll auto-detect it. Always auto-detects the clip settings and notices if it doesn't match this default sequence settings. So yes, let's match the two. And then let's have a look. Sequence settings. See, and it's auto-detected that this should be 720 by 480, and moreover that the pixels should not be square. Right? This is a rectangular pixel setting right here. Alright? So it's detected that. It also, of course, detects the codec. It's very clever that way. But then, what if I want to go and put, what if I have half my footage in 640 by 480 and half my footage in 720 by 480, and I want to put them all in the same vid? Is something horrible going to happen? Actually, no. Because Final Cut will figure it out. When I put this down here, you'll notice Final Cut needs to render it, because Final Cut is now going to take the step. What it's actually going to do in this case is change my 640 square pixel footage back to a rectangular pixel, because that's the sequence setting I'm on. It doesn't make any sense actually to go from a rectangular pixel to a square pixel to a rectangular pixel. And this is one of the reasons why I want you to just be aware of what you're doing with your pixel aspect ratio. Because if you end up processing the footage a bunch of times like this for no reason, you're overworking the footage. It's not going to come out as nice. So we didn't really need to do that. We could have just had the whole thing in 720 by 480. But there we go. Even if we made that mistake, Final Cut has fixed it. And as you can see, it all looks good. It's all the same aspect ratio. It's not squooshed. It's not letterboxed. It looks great. When we go to export it, we're going to export it again using the rectangular pixel aspect ratio. Right? So this is all standard. When we go to size, what we're going to do is look for a rectangular pixel aspect ratio. Now this is a little harder, and this is where a little bit of knowing your math comes in handy. But we know, don't we, that 720 by 480 in 4:3 is a rectangular pixel aspect ratio. Whereas 720 by 480 16:9 is a square pixel aspect ratio. Right? They'd have to be, because they're the same resolution but different aspect ratios. To go from 4:3 to 16:9 without changing the number of pixels, you have to change the shape of the pixels. Right, so we know that this is actually the sequence setting this is the sequence setting we've been working with. This is the setting we want. That's what we're going to go with. Okay? And if I went and exported it, it would look absolutely fine. Alright, so that's one way I could do it. But I could also do it the other way around. Let's open a new sequence. And rather than putting the 720 in first, let's put the 640 in first. Let's plop that down. Let Final Cut auto-detect the settings of the clip and match to the sequence. And then if we go and look at sequence settings, we'll look at that, 640 by 480, 4:3, and now the pixel aspect ratio is square because it's detected that the pixel aspect ratio is square. Fabulous, right? Everything is as it should be. If I had made a mistake, or if I hadn't bothered to change this 720 by 480 into a square pixel aspect ratio at this point, that's okay. Final Cut's going to do it for me right now, right? So I can change it from rectangular to square pixels when I rip it from the DVD. I can do it in MPEG Streamclip, or I can do it here in Final Cut. It doesn't make a big difference that I have noticed. So once again, Final Cut needs to render it because it's changing it from the rectangular to the square pixel aspect ratio so that it matches the sequence. So as you can see, one of the main reasons, if you're going to change the pixel aspect ratio, one of the main reasons to change it earlier, either when you're ripping from the DVD or when you're clipping in MPEG Streamclip, is simply to save you time here in the Vidding stage. You don't want to have to stop and render every single clip. That's going to slow you down. It may not slow you down as much as it slows me down because your computer might work a little faster, but nonetheless, it's an annoyance. So try to have all your pixel aspect ratio ducks in a row before you get to this stage, right? If you have everything in the same pixel aspect ratio before you import it into Final Cut, then it'll just save you a lot of time. But if you don't manage to do that for whatever reason, Final Cut has your back. It's going to fix it for you. Then when you go to export, in this case, we've changed our pixel aspect ratio to square. So we're going to use a square setting. This one is not going to do it for us. 720 by 480, 4:3. Nuh-uh, that's not our resolution anymore. We're working at 640 by 480, 4:3. So simply choose 640 by 480. There you go. Also, if ever you need to, you can always type it in and it'll work just as well. So if one of these presets doesn't work for you, go to Custom, type in the resolution, and off you go. If you do not know the resolution to type it in, what can you do to get it? Well, again, very simply, look at your sequence settings. There it is, 640 by 480. That's the resolution that you're working with. That's the resolution you should export. Okay? So, pixel aspect ratio seems really scary, and it can be because it can be difficult to understand, but the upshot is that you have a lot of different places that you can mess with it, and these programs will compensate for any problem that you're having with pixel aspect ratio. Now, the question you might ask is, well, should I be using rectangular pixels or should I be using square pixels? The answer is actually that it's up to you. It used to make more of a difference, but computers will play, and most video players and things will play both. Computers are very good at playing both for the most part. One of the few places that I run into a problem with it is when I'm exporting something to send to VividCon. They have a particular policy of having rectangular pixels, but because of the way that they make their con DVDs. But for the most part, it doesn't make a huge difference as long as you're consistent about it, and you don't mess it up at any stage. It doesn't really matter what you end up with. I recommend using square pixels myself because most contemporary HD footage is square, and so I just end up always using square pixels because that's the footage I'm working with. But if I were making a vid exclusively from DVDs, if I were making a Farscape vid, for example, from my Farscape box set, then I might consider making it in rectangular pixels, because then I wouldn't have to, at any point, change the pixel aspect ratio. And the less you work the footage, the less you change it, the prettier it ends up.